Why was she walking into my home as if she owned it? That's the thought that hit me as I saw Miranda Sloan, the ever-demanding HOA president, parading a group of strangers through the log cabin that had been in my family for 3 generations. On the coffee table, glossy brochures shouted phrases like "must sell quickly" and "perfect investment opportunity." I stepped directly into the middle of her house tour, and suddenly every gaze in the room landed on me, the rightful owner of the property. Miranda went pale, fumbling for her phone and dialing 911 with trembling fingers. What she didn't realize was that the land beneath her feet held a secret, and that call she was making was about to unravel far more than she bargained for. Just hours earlier, I had been driving back from a 3-day business trip to Seattle, my head still buzzing with blueprints and client meetings. Pulling into the gravel driveway, I immediately noticed the unfamiliar cars: a silver Mercedes, a white SUV, and a sedan with magnetic signs that screamed real estate agent. My first thought was absurd, a burglary, but this was Crystal Lake, a place where people still trusted unlocked doors. I parked my truck behind the Mercedes, boxing it in. From the cabin, I saw warm light spilling through the windows and heard a low murmur of voices. My gut twisted. This wasn't a break-in, it was something stranger. That cabin wasn't just wood and stone. Built in 1952 by my grandfather Thomas Ward, it had stood for decades as the heart of our family. I'd spent summers learning to fish from the dock and Thanksgivings crammed shoulder to shoulder at the oak table. The scent of cedar and smoke still clung to its beams. Each floorboard carried our history. Instead of barging inside, I crept around to the side window, crouching low where my grandfather once taught me bird calls. One glance through the glass left me stunned. There stood Miranda Sloan, self-proclaimed enforcer of HOA rules who had tormented me with endless complaints for months. Now, she was standing before my great-grandfather's fireplace, confidently weaving a lie. She gestured toward the hand-carved mantel, telling her audience that this home had belonged to her family since 1952. Her voice dripped with faux sympathy as she explained how the previous owner had abandoned it overseas, leaving it to decay. She made it sound like a bargain, neglecting the truth that every artifact in that cabin was tied to my bloodline. On the coffee table lay real estate flyers featuring photos of my cabin with a bold listing price of $450,000. Next to them sat a suspicious-looking power of attorney, complete with a shaky forgery of my last name and a counterfeit notary stamp I recognized from fraudulent permits I'd spotted in my career as an architect. The group Miranda had gathered was a mix: a middle-aged couple asking pointed questions about the foundation, a woman in her 60s who kept scanning the cabin with faint recognition, and a silent man in a dark jacket who was meticulously taking notes and snapping photos. Something about his precise focus on documents and reactions felt nothing like a buyer. I'd had enough. Taking a steadying breath, I walked to the front door and entered with the confidence of someone who belonged because I did. "Excuse me," I said evenly, "but there seems to be some mistake. I'm Ethan Ward, and this is my home." The room froze. Only the fire Miranda had lit crackled in the silence. Faces turned towards me, curiosity and unease etched across them. Miranda's practiced smile faltered but quickly returned. After all, she didn't get to be HOA president by backing away from conflict. Recovering her poise, she turned to the group and said in a rehearsed tone, "I don't know who this man is, but this is a scheduled showing. Sir, you'll need to leave." She gestured at the documents on the table as though they were indisputable proof. "All the paperwork is right here." "What proof do you have of your claim?" For the first time, doubt flickered in me. Surrounded by strangers, being painted as some intruder in my own cabin, I wondered if I should just let my lawyer handle it. But before the thought could settle, the older woman stepped forward with a look of recognition. "Ethan Ward? Tommy Ward's grandson?" she asked softly. "I'm Janet Morrison. I went to school with your mother. I remember the picnics your family hosted by the lake. Your grandfather taught us kids to fish right off that dock." Her words cut through Miranda's lies like sunlight breaking a storm. This wasn't just about ownership, it was about legacy, community, and truth. I pulled my wallet from my pocket and placed my own documents on the table beside Miranda's forgeries, the original deed with my grandfather's signature, recent utility bills in my name, tax receipts, and the purchase agreement that cemented the Ward family's claim to the land. The quiet man in the dark jacket leaned in, studying the papers intently, scribbling faster than before. Miranda's mask of confidence was beginning to crack, panic flickering across her face, yet instead of admitting defeat, she escalated. "I'm calling the police," she snapped. "This man has been harassing our community for months, and now he's having some kind of breakdown." As she began to dial, I walked calmly toward the old fieldstone fireplace. My hand rested on a particular wooden panel, one my grandfather had always hinted at in his bedtime stories. "Before you make that call, Miranda," I said quietly, "there's something you should know about this house." "There's something about this cabin you don't know, Miranda," I said, my hand still resting on the old panel by the fireplace. "Something my grandfather left behind that never made it into public records. And it might just change who everyone here believes has the true right to this home." The memories came rushing back the moment my fingers touched that worn wood. I was a child again, lying in the loft while Grandpa Tommy tapped out a rhythm on my headboard of 3 steady beats, like a heartbeat. "Ethan," he would whisper in his gravelly voice, "that's the pulse of the earth itself. One day you'll understand why it matters." Back then, I thought it was just another one of his bedtime stories, like his talk of hidden treasure or government secrets. But standing there, accused of being unstable in my own house, I realized maybe those stories had been instructions all along. Miranda, though, wasn't shaken. If anything, my mention of family secrets only seemed to fuel her. She dialed number after number, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "This is Miranda Sloan, president of the Crystal Lake HOA. We have an unstable individual here. He's been harassing residents for months. Now he's having some kind of breakdown. He needs immediate intervention." I almost had to respect her performance. She was sharp, manipulative, and unafraid to weaponize perception. For months she had been targeting me with citations and threats. First, she went after my dog, claiming it didn't meet regulations even though it had been built long before the HOA even existed. Then she cited me for unauthorized exterior work when I repaired a loose section of siding with the same cedar logs my grandfather used in the 50s. And most recently, she'd been waving threats of foreclosure over delinquent HOA dues I never actually owed. Since this cabin predates their entire organization, piece by piece, she'd been trying to push me out. That's when Janet Morrison's voice rang out, firm now with conviction. "Ethan Ward, Tommy's grandson. I knew your mother, Sarah. I remember those summer gatherings your family hosted right here on the lake. Your grandfather organized fishing contests for us kids, and your grandmother's blueberry pies were legendary." She turned toward the group of strangers, her tone carrying the weight of memory and loyalty. "This family has been part of Crystal Lake since before most of our houses even existed. I can vouch for their place here." Her words felt like a lifeline. But even so, I saw hesitation in the faces of the middle-aged couple. They were exchanging wary glances, clearly uneasy about being caught in what looked like a legal dispute. Only the quiet man in the dark jacket seemed more intrigued than ever, his pen scratching rapidly as he noted every detail. For a brief moment, I considered backing down and calling my lawyer and letting him deal with the mess. The sight of my grandfather's coffee table covered in forged papers, combined with Miranda's brazen lies, made it tempting to walk away. But then Janet's defense reminded me this wasn't just about property lines. This was about my family's legacy, about honoring my grandfather's trust. So I pulled out my proof. From my wallet came the deed signed by my grandfather in 1952, utility bills in my name, up-to-date property tax receipts, even the original purchase agreement confirming the Ward family's ownership of this lakeside land. I laid them neatly beside Miranda's forged paperwork. "Here's the real documentation, dates, signatures, seals so you can verify any of it with the county clerk." The difference was obvious. My papers carried the weight of decades as official seals, consistent fonts, and a clear history. Miranda's were sloppy in comparison, riddled with mismatched text and notary stamps that looked like they'd been bought online last week. The quiet man leaned closer, eyes sharp, and finally spoke for the first time. "I'd like to take a closer look at these, if you don't mind." His voice carried authority, and instantly, the room shifted. Even Miranda flinched, her mask slipping for just a second before she plastered her confident smile back in place. But she wasn't finished. She waved another document like it was a weapon. "I'm reporting him for trespassing, harassment, and violations of multiple county codes. As HOA president, I have legal authority to secure this property. He's in direct violation of court orders and environmental regulations." Her voice was steady, but I could see the cracks, and I knew it was time to show them what my grandfather had meant all along. I pressed my palm along the wood panel, fingertips finding that faint indentation I'd felt as a boy. Slowly, I tapped 3 times at the same rhythm my grandfather had taught me, the heartbeat of the earth. A faint click whispered from inside the wall. Then, with a smooth slide, the panel shifted aside, revealing a hidden compartment about the size of a shoebox. Inside, wrapped in cedar, were documents preserved for decades. I pulled the first out carefully, a rolled map, yellowed with age, stamped in bold red letters, classified. As I unrolled it across the table, sweeping Miranda's forgeries aside, the official markings of the U.S. Geological Survey came into view. This wasn't just a map, it was a Cold War-era analysis of the Crystal Lake region, showing underground aquifers, mineral deposits, and geological structures the government had deemed critical to national security more than 70 years ago. The room fell silent. This was no fairy tale. My grandfather wasn't just a man who bought a piece of land, I said, scanning the faces around me as the weight of the revelation began to sink in. Thomas Ward worked for the federal government in the early 1950s. He was contracted as a surveyor, tasked with monitoring and safeguarding vital water resources. This cabin wasn't randomly built on the lake shore, it was deliberately placed here as a watchpoint over the junction of 3 major aquifers that supply drinking water to the entire Tri-County region. I spread the map out fully, pointing to the red markings that clearly indicated the aquifer intersection beneath our land. The technical notes left no room for doubt. This was a federally recognized critical watershed, subject to congressional oversight and federal protection. Beside the map were letters of personal correspondence on government letterhead, signed by officials whose names I'd only ever seen in history books. The letters praised my grandfather for his discretion, thanked him for years of service in protecting water security, and laid out strict instructions. Any transfer or development of this property would require federal clearance. One letter, dated 1954, went even further, declaring the site under permanent federal protection due to its environmental importance, regardless of who claimed ownership. Janet Morrison gasped as the truth clicked into place. "Good heavens," she whispered. "Tommy never told anyone. We thought he was just passionate about fishing and the lake, but he was guarding our water supply the whole time." Her eyes grew misty as she recalled memories. "He used to collect water samples constantly. We thought it was just a quirky hobby, but now I see he was working under orders." That's when the quiet man in the dark jacket finally revealed himself. Stepping forward, he pulled a wallet from his coat and flipped it open to show a federal badge. "I need to examine these documents more closely," he said, his voice steady and official. "I'm Agent Robert Hayes, State Real Estate Investigation Unit. We've been following a ring of fraudulent property sales, most of them targeting land with strategic water rights." The shift in the room was instant. His calm declaration carried the weight of truth. Miranda's confident smirk faltered, her bravado slipping. "These could be fake," she said, her tone sharper now, almost desperate. "Anyone can forge old letters and maps. I have proper court documents proving my authority to conduct this sale." She brandished her so-called power of attorney, but against the authentic federal paperwork it looked pitiful, more like a prop than evidence. Agent Hayes was already speaking into his radio, his tone clipped and professional. "This is Hayes. I need environmental crimes on site, and a forensic document team immediately. We may be dealing with federal water protection violations in addition to real estate fraud." He turned back to the group, his demeanor cold and unshakable now. "Any transaction involving this property requires congressional authorization. What's been attempted here tonight is a serious federal offense." The middle-aged couple who had been peppering Miranda with questions looked horrified. "We nearly bought federal land?" the husband asked in disbelief. "Our agent never said a word about restrictions or environmental protections." They started gathering their things, clearly eager to separate themselves from the growing storm. But Miranda wasn't finished. With her plan unraveling, she produced another sheet of paper, a supposed court order with stamps and legal jargon. "I don't care what you claim those old letters mean," she snapped. "I have a current order from the county declaring that Ethan Ward owes $50,000 in unpaid HOA fees and environmental penalties. This land is under immediate seizure." Agent Hayes studied the document with one glance and shook his head. "Forgery, wrong seal, invalid case number, and this judge retired 3 years ago." "Nice try." He pulled out a camera and began photographing everything, carefully preserving evidence. "You've just presented multiple falsified legal documents to a federal investigator. That alone carries serious penalties." Miranda's phone began to ring. She snatched it up, forcing confidence back into her voice. "Sheriff Martinez, thank God. We have a dangerous trespasser here and someone impersonating a federal agent." As she stopped, her expression drained of color as the voice on the other end cut her off. "Mrs. Sloan, this is the district attorney's office. We need your immediate location. You're under active investigation in connection with federal real estate fraud cases." Her phone trembled in her hand as Agent Hayes calmly took it away. "Marshal, this is Hayes. Send over the warrants you've been preparing. We'll need them executed tonight." The tension in the cabin thickened. Hayes coordinated quietly with the DA's office while Miranda's world collapsed around her. The call she thought would save her had instead delivered the final blow. When he turned back, his tone was grim but certain. "We've been tracking this operation for 8 months. Mrs. Sloan is not acting alone as she's part of a larger network targeting properties tied to critical water systems." That was when the so-called buyers made their move. The middle-aged couple who had been questioning the cabin so intently began inching toward the door, hoping to slip away. But Hayes stopped them with a raised hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson," he said flatly, checking his notes with a knowing smile. "Or should I say David and Carol Peterson, scouts for Lakeside Development Corporation. You've attended at least 17 fraudulent showings in the last 6 months, always asking about septic systems, foundations, and conveniently water access." The couple froze, their cover blown completely. Panic flashed in their eyes. And just like that, the quiet property showing had transformed into the unmasking of a full-scale conspiracy. Janet Morrison's face showed pure astonishment as she pieced it together. "So this entire viewing a broken bar, it wasn't real? None of you ever intended to buy Ethan's cabin?" Agent Hayes gave a firm nod. "Mrs. Morrison, you're the only genuine bystander in this room tonight, which makes you an essential witness to what amounts to a carefully orchestrated criminal conspiracy." He shifted his gaze toward the Petersons. "Lakeside Development Corporation has been systematically seizing water rights across the region. They've used forged documents, false court filings, and intimidation to force owners into selling at a fraction of true market value." The weight of the scheme hit me as Hayes pulled out evidence from his briefcase: photographs, fraudulent deeds, counterfeit legal papers all tied to properties near Crystal Lake, Clearwater Reservoir, and Pine Valley. "The value of what they've stolen exceeds $50 million, he continued gravely. "And if their development had gone forward, it would have poisoned the drinking water of nearly 500,000 people across the Tri-County area." Cornered but unwilling to surrender, Miranda tried one last performance. She dialed her phone, voice trembling with a mix of fear and outrage. "This is Miranda Sloan. I need to report federal overreach. These so-called agents are using fake credentials to scare homeowners and sabotage legitimate transactions." Her tearful plea could have convinced an uninformed outsider, but Hayes didn't even flinch. He simply held up his phone, displaying a live transcript of her call. "Mrs. Sloan, what you don't realize is that your line has been under federal monitoring for weeks. That call went straight to Sheriff Martinez, who has been part of this investigation for 3 months. Every word spoken tonight is recorded as evidence in a federal crimes case." The trap had been set long before Miranda's scheme ever reached Ethan's doorstep, and now she was neck-deep in it. The mention of Martinez cooperating sent the Petersons into a panic. David Peterson edged toward the door, but Hayes intercepted him effortlessly. "Sir, you're not under arrest yet, but you are a material witness. If you try to leave, that becomes obstruction of justice." The cabin, once staged as a property viewing, was transforming into an evidence collection site. Janet Morrison raised her hand nervously, as though she were back in a courtroom. Agent Hay has a broken bar. There's something I should tell you. I'm not just a neighbor who stumbled in here. I used to work as a county records clerk. For the past year we've been tracking irregular filings at the lake. That's why I suspected fraud. Hayes smiled faintly and made a note. Another missing piece fell into place. Lakeside's playbook is clear, he said, laying it out for us all. They target land with valuable water access, pressure vulnerable owners with fake lawsuits or false debts, and use corrupt officials to rush sales. Miranda's forged power of attorney would have handed them millions in water rights instantly. Just then, headlights swept across the windows. The sound of tires on gravel was followed by the unmistakable flash of law enforcement vehicles. Hayes glanced outside. That'll be Sheriff Martinez with the arrest warrants. Moments later, the sheriff strode inside, paperwork in hand. Miranda Sloan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, forgery of government documents, and multiple violations of federal environmental law. As he began reciting her rights, Miranda's phone buzzed with a new message. Her face drained of color as she read it. Hayes snatched the device and studied the text. His professional calm hardened into something colder. We've got a problem, he announced. The message was blunt. Operation compromised. Eliminate all evidence and witnesses. Extraction team ETA, 20 minutes. The air in the cabin went still. Whatever this was, it was bigger than local fraud. Hayes looked to Martinez and spoke in clipped tones. Miranda isn't just a crooked HOA president. She's a mid-level operative in an international water syndicate, and they're willing to kill to protect their investments. He pulled up a satellite overlay on his tablet, displaying Crystal Lake's aquifer system. The networks stretched farther and deeper than any of us imagined. The plan was simple and devastating, Hayes explained. Contaminate the public water source with their development, then sell clean water back to the counties at extortion prices. They've done it before in Nevada, Oregon, Northern California. Communities that once had free access now pay private corporations for every drop. This isn't real estate fraud anymore. It's environmental terrorism disguised as progress. Overwhelmed by the mounting pressure of federal charges on one side and the threat of her own allies on the other, Miranda finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as her polished facade collapsed. I never agreed to this, she confessed in a trembling voice. They told me it was just about luxury homes and boosting property values. When I discovered the environmental consequences, I tried to walk away a broken bar, but then they showed me what happened to a county inspector in Oregon who asked too many questions. His car accidentally went off a mountain road. His family got the message. Her words made my stomach twist. These weren't simply greedy developers, they were killers. Protecting our cabin had turned into a fight to stop a disaster that could poison entire communities. Agent Hayes wasted no time, relaying details to the FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit. The distant thrum of helicopters confirmed that reinforcements were already closing in. Janet Morrison, still shaken but impressively steady for a woman in her 60s, stepped forward with a folder in hand. I've been keeping track of shady property transfers for months, she explained. 3 county commissioners, the head of planning, even a couple of judges. They've been pushing through permits that normally take years of environmental review. Her grassroots digging had exposed corruption stretching deep into local government. Meanwhile, Agent Hayes revealed the true importance of my grandfather's hidden system. Thomas Ward wasn't just trying to protect his land, Hayes explained, unlocking a concealed panel by the fireplace. Behind it, a bank of advanced instruments glowed softly. This monitoring station has been collecting real-time data on water quality and flow since the 1950s. It's part of a federal network. Without this site, the syndicate could manipulate the system without anyone noticing. The realization hit me hard. Our family's cabin wasn't just a retreat. It was a safeguard for the region's entire water supply. Miranda's phone buzzed again. This time the message was chilling. Witnesses confirmed. Proceed with permanent solution. No survivors. Hayes immediately called for tactical backup and moved Janet and the Petersons to safer positions. Then he turned to me. Mr. Ward, activate your grandfather's emergency protocols. There should be a direct federal link built into this system. Suddenly, Bedtime stories from my childhood clicked into place. My grandfather had spoken of emergency buttons and calling the cavalry. I'd always thought it was just his way of comforting me, but with Hayes guiding me, I located a red device hidden behind the equipment. When I pressed it, a clear voice answered almost instantly. Crystal Lake Guardian Station, NORAD Water Security Command. State your emergency. Within minutes, the chop of helicopters filled the air, and searchlights swept the forest beyond our windows. Hayes turned to me with a grim smile. This is why your grandfather chose this spot. Not just for monitoring it's a defensive stronghold for the entire watershed. Federal tactical teams quickly surrounded the cabin. Soon after, word came through Hayes's radio. The syndicate's extraction squad had been intercepted 5 miles away. They weren't just carrying guns, they had military-grade explosives powerful enough to obliterate the cabin. These weren't hired thugs, Hayes muttered. They were mercenaries with orders to erase every witness and shred all evidence. The gravity of it all hit me as I poured coffee from my grandfather's old pot, my hands trembling. The cabin where I'd spent summers roasting marshmallows had just become the centerpiece of a national security battle. And the night wasn't over. At 8 a.m. sharp, 3 sleek luxury vehicles pulled up the driveway, their passengers carrying themselves with the arrogance of victors. At the head was County Commissioner Bradley Thompson, a man I'd watched on the news for years, praising sustainable growth and environmental responsibility. Now, it was clear he was the architect of the entire scheme, preparing to sell off the Pacific Northwest's water rights. "Good morning, Miranda," Thompson greeted cheerfully as he strode toward the cabin, flanked by 2 executives in tailored suits. "I trust our little acquisition went according to plan." The overseas investors are eager to move on to Phase 2. Behind them, a sharp-eyed woman carrying a briefcase followed. Hayes, listening through his earpiece, identified her as the syndicate's financial chief, the one responsible for laundering tens of millions in stolen assets. From his concealed vantage point behind the kitchen counter, Hayes observed everything. Meanwhile, Miranda, now wearing a wire and putting on the performance of her life, opened the door with a smile that looked utterly convincing. "Bradley," she said warmly, "so good to see you. Come in, Sadia. You'll be very pleased with how it all turned out." The moment Thompson crossed the threshold, the confidence in his expression faltered. Commissioner Thompson's confidence faltered the moment his eyes landed on the monitoring equipment agent Hayes had purposely left in plain sight. His brow furrowed as suspicion grew. "Miranda, what is all this?" None of this showed up in the property reports. The executives trailing behind him began scanning the cabin uneasily, their unease growing with every passing second. Miranda, sticking closely to the script Hayes had prepared, answered with practiced calm. "Oh, that, just some outdated government hardware left behind by the previous owner. Nothing we can't clear out once demolition begins." But Thompson wasn't convinced. He edged closer to the coffee table, where my grandfather's files, maps, letters, and reports were laid out in the open. His face drained of color the instant he recognized them. "You reckless fool," he snapped at Miranda. "Do you realize what you've exposed? This land has been under federal protection for decades. These documents prove it." The once arrogant politician now looked cornered, his fall from power as dramatic as Miranda's earlier collapse, though far more gratifying to witness. That was the moment Agent Hayes revealed himself, stepping from behind the counter with his badge raised and sidearm steady. "Commissioner Bradley Thompson," he announced firmly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism, theft of water rights, and conspiracy to commit murder." The executives immediately surrendered, their hands shooting into the air. The financial officer bolted for the door but was tackled by tactical agents who had been waiting outside for this very moment. Even as handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Thompson tried to bluff his way out. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he sneered. "I have allies in state and federal government. This will all be buried before you can finish the paperwork." Hayes simply smirked, producing a thick folder of evidence. "Commissioner, those so-called allies have been working with us for half a year," Hayes replied evenly. "Every call, every bribe, every meeting. You were never speaking to friends, only undercover agents." The depth of the sting was breathtaking. The seized briefcase confirmed everything: offshore accounts, falsified reports, and blueprints for poisoning water supplies across the western United States. This wasn't just about Crystal Lake, Hayes explained as his team cataloged the files. The plan was to manipulate water access for over 2 million people across 7 states, manufacturing shortages so you could profit from selling back clean water. Reporters, tipped off by federal agents, swarmed the property as the criminals were escorted out in cuffs. Thompson, red-faced and desperate, tried to spin the narrative. "This is a misunderstanding," he shouted to the cameras. "I was working for the good of the community." His claims were drowned out as Hayes read transcripts aloud, damning recordings where Thompson personally discussed silencing witnesses and sabotaging monitoring stations. Justice, it seemed, had chosen poetic timing. Miranda, who had walked into my family cabin planning to steal it, was instead arrested inside those same walls. The sham property showing had transformed into a full-blown federal asset seizure, with luxury vehicles being towed away as criminal evidence. Janet Morrison, who had thought she was witnessing nothing more than real estate fraud, was now being thanked by federal prosecutors for uncovering records that toppled one of the most far-reaching environmental conspiracies in American history. "Your grassroots work was the cornerstone of this case," Hayes told her warmly. By dawn, Crystal Lake shimmered in the early light, its water safeguarded, its legacy preserved. Standing on the dock where my grandfather had once taught me to fish, I realized the bedtime stories he'd told weren't just fables, they were warnings. He had always known this place wasn't merely a retreat, but a front-line guardian of an entire region's water security. My fight to protect the family cabin had, without intention, safeguarded drinking water for millions. Months later, I returned to that same dock, watching my young nephew practice casting a fishing line just as 3 generations of Ward men had done before him. The trials had ended with sweeping convictions. Thompson received 15 years in federal prison. Miranda, who cooperated, served 8. The executives and financial officers who strutted so boldly into my cabin that morning were handed life sentences without parole. The ripple effects were profound. Crystal Lake became a model of environmental stewardship and national security. My grandfather's one secret monitoring system was upgraded with cutting-edge technology, transforming the site into a testing ground for next-generation water protection. Universities sent students here to study, and international delegations arrived to learn how ordinary citizens had stood up to global corruption. The cabin was formally recognized as the Thomas Ward Environmental Heritage Site, its hidden compartments preserved as a museum honoring decades of quiet service. The government issued a long-overdue commendation for my grandfather's work, finally revealing the truth behind his mysterious absences and endless water samples. Janet Morrison became the site's volunteer historian, telling visitors about a time when neighbors trusted one another enough to guard secrets that safeguarded everyone. Our case set new legal standards for prosecuting environmental crimes, studied in law schools and adopted by prosecutors nationwide. Advocacy groups used our victory to inspire local communities, proving that ordinary people, united, could topple entrenched corruption. PBS later aired a documentary about the case, exposing links between local corruption and global environmental crime, winning national awards for investigative reporting. Even Miranda's story took an unexpected turn. In prison, forced into environmental restoration projects, she confronted the damage she'd once helped cause. Upon release after 6 years, she founded a nonprofit dedicated to protecting elderly homeowners from real estate fraud, using her insider knowledge to prevent others from being exploited. The community itself flourished. Property values stabilized, ethical families moved in, and sustainable projects replaced the syndicate's reckless resort plans. Tourism bloomed as people came to see the place where a small town defeated an international crime syndicate. Sheriff Martinez, whose undercover role had been pivotal, was promoted to head a multi-county environmental crimes task force. Reforms reshaped local government, replacing backroom deals with public hearings and independent reviews. Together, we established the Crystal Lake Environmental Trust, ensuring that no future development could threaten the land or its water. The annual Thomas Ward Environmental Protection Day became a regional celebration of science, community, and courage. What began as one man defending his family's cabin had become a nationwide symbol of resiliency, a proof that even the most powerful corruption can be defeated when ordinary citizens stand together. The first annual Thomas Ward Environmental Protection Day brought together families, scientists, activists, and public officials, each gathering to renew their pledge to safeguard natural resources for generations yet to come. From that day forward, the seized fortune of the syndicate was redirected into a federal restitution fund. It not only compensated every family swindled by fraudulent land grabs, but also powered new conservation projects that would outlast the scandal itself. Elderly residents across nearby counties, once robbed of both property and dignity, now received restitution and closure. Their relief wasn't only financial, it came from knowing that those responsible for exploiting them were finally behind bars. Healing spread through the community like sunlight breaking after a long storm, knitting neighbors closer together as they realized they had all been preyed upon by the same network of criminals. On evenings like this, I often find myself standing at the shoreline, watching the lake blaze with streaks of gold and crimson as the sun dips low. My nephew's fishing line arcs out across the water, just as my grandfather once showed me. In those quiet moments, the weight of it all becomes clear. The hidden sacrifice my grandfather carried in silence had grown into something much larger than a family legacy. It had preserved the very lifeblood of our region. The monitoring systems inside the cabin still hum softly, watching over the watershed with tireless vigilance. Children laugh and splash in the lake, their parents unburdened by fear of contamination, their futures safeguarded by the choices made here. What once seemed like a simple fight to save a cabin had proven a universal truth. Defending what is yours often means defending what belongs to everyone. And sometimes, the greatest victories begin with the smallest act of courage. As twilight gives way to starlight, and the lake reflects a sky unspoiled by pollution, I know my grandfather would be proud. His bedtime stories about honor, courage, and community responsibility were never just tales for children. They were a roadmap, one that ended with the protection of millions of lives. Have you ever been threatened by someone convinced that power makes them untouchable? Maybe you've seen false documents used to scare families, or watched corrupt officials abuse authority to silence opposition. I know that helplessness. I know that rage. But I've also learned something else. No bully is invincible. Every scheme leaves traces, and with the right persistence, every Goliath can fall to a David. These stories aren't just entertainment, they are blueprints for resistance, reminders that ordinary people can and do overcome extraordinary odds. If you believe in standing up for justice, if you want to hear more about how underdogs rise to protect their communities, then join the HOA Stories community, where every episode proves that the smallest voices can change the world. From all of us here at HOA Stories, thank you for being part of this journey through community chaos. We understand the frustrations of red tape, the mysteries of hidden fees, and the battles against faceless institutions. Keep your gates locked, your cameras rolling, and your courage ready, because the next story might be yours.